Hello, everyone. My name is Saeed. I'm a founder and CEO of Nextstars. I'm today joined with Josh Shacknow, an immigration lawyer and the founder of a company called Visto AI. Josh, I will ask you to introduce yourself, but is a very outspoken immigration lawyer, very technology oriented, and I've been following you on LinkedIn and read some of your work and watched some of the podcasts that you've done. Super excited to have you to talk about such an important and timely topic. How does Trump election how can this election, this recent win, impact Canadian immigration? We're going to look at the trends from 2016 to 2020 and try to kind of make sense of what may happen next in this already very uncertain environment. So, Josh, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Saeed. I really appreciate it. And as you said, it's interesting times, to put it very lightly. Lots to talk about, and hopefully people will find it entertaining and helpful.
Thank you. If you do you want to talk a little bit about Visto AI? Because I've been following the company as well. I think you started before COVID, and really the goal is to bring some technology into the field of immigration.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just give a really fast background that I think will provide some perspective for this conversation. So I'm based in Toronto. I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer. I've been one since the beginning of 2017, which I think is kind of interesting timing given what we're about to talk about here. Excuse me, around 20 end of 2019, I co-founded a tech company called Visto AI, Visto AI, because as a lawyer, I was just doing so much repetitive admin work, and I didn't understand why there wasn't more automation and tools and software to make it easier. So we've built a platform that we provide to law firms all across Canada, sometimes even beyond Canada. And basically, what it helps them do is leverage automation and AI to manage their clients, prepare applications faster, all that kind of stuff. So if you are an immigration professional interested in that, definitely take a look. And yeah, very excited to as you mentioned, while doing that, I am always staying up to date on Canadian immigration, and I'm relatively vocal about the news and my thoughts on LinkedIn. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn, and you know, things are changing every week, so there's no shortage of content to post and talk about, and I try to keep people updated as best I can.
That's amazing. Yeah, so I think like without further ado, we can just jump right into the conversation. So Josh, this past election, I think caught a lot of people by surprise, but a lot of people were also expecting it. And with a little bit of disclaimer that this is not really meant to be a political conversation. It's going to be a technical one where we discuss some facts and some judgments, which is professional judgments, and it's not meant to be a political conversation, but nonetheless, it's the U.S. elections always has impacts on any country around the world. The results, particularly, we have the largest border with them, and what happens there inevitably has impact on every aspect of our lives in Canada, but particularly on immigration. So, how, in your views, does this Trump recent win will impact the Canadian immigration landscape, in your view?
I mean, I think it's a loaded question because it's most definitely going to affect it. The question is not if, the question is how, right? And so one thing that some people don't fully appreciate about immigration, if you're not really living and breathing in the industry, is that immigration is actually comprised of many different, we'll call them program types, right? Because different countries have different terminology, right? But for example, especially because we're focused a little bit more on Canada, I'll use a little bit more of the Canadian friendly terminology. So for example, economic immigration. We're talking about skilled workers and, sponsorship through companies and stuff like that. We have family immigration, sponsoring siblings and, kids and whatever, right? We have refugees, right? So people who are coming in from, fleeing their countries and claiming asylum and stuff like that, right? So the thing that I've been thinking about and trying to understand here, especially with the election results, is how does Trump winning affect all of those, right? Because he will affect everyone, some of them a little bit differently than others. So to answer your question, the first thing I wanted to do is kind of break it down that way. And secondly, say that we're going to want to keep close tabs on what he does and especially like in what order, right? We've heard some rumblings of what he's said he's going to do, right? Shutting the border with Mexico, removing all the illegals, right? I mean, I'm using kind of like Trump speech, and I'm generalizing a little bit here, but bear with me, right? Making it harder on green card holders, maybe putting bigger caps on the H-1B, right? So basically, what it sounds like he's going to do is be harder across the board, right?
Mhm.
My guess is that he'll probably be harder. And again, this is a guess, and I'm no political expert per se, but my guess is he'll probably be harder on the non-economic stuff. It sounds like he's going to take a really tough stance on the border with Mexico, more so with Canada, more so the Mexican border than the Canadian border. It sounds like he's going to have not too much compassion on the asylum side. It sounds like I was reading, actually partly in preparation for this talk, harder to get U.S. citizenship by descent, right? So just the fact that you're born in the U.S. may not make it so that you're a citizen, right? You're one or both of your parents may need a certain status in order for you to become a citizen upon birth. So I think he's going to probably and maybe reduce and restrict things across the board. If I had to guess, it would be especially bad on the refugee related stuff, on the border stuff, and probably a little bit on the economic side, but maybe not as much. Right? He's a businessman, right? So is he going to go and start heavily restricting or like reducing H-1B numbers? I don't know. Might be good to connect with a U.S. immigration lawyer to get that perspective as well. But all of those will have different effects on Canada that we'll see how they pan out.
Absolutely. I think, I remember even from 2016, there was a lot of talks amongst particularly tech founders that are based out of the States, or like employees that worked in large tech firms. There was some uncertainty that they had, or they were feeling, not only for their own status, but also the ability of their loved ones, their parents or spouses, to be able to reunite with them in the States. I know a few examples on top of my head that they made the decision to come to Canada. And from a Canadian landscape, like, have at it, right? So you want to have those people come to Canada, and they would have tracked them over the past like few years. They're all successful. They've Some of them made businesses and great, immensely successful here. I think a Trump victory, not only on the policy side, would impact people that are in the States, and probably Canada would be a good option for them to consider, as the search for how to move to Canada was all-time high, I think, on the election day in the States. But also, it can impact a lot of the people that are, let's say, in Vietnam, China, around the world, are thinking of relocating to North America, like, as they're weighing their options. So I think in both cases, it probably in this sense would lead to higher demand for Canada. What do you think?
Well, probably, but the problem, Saeed, and this is like one of the really interesting parts, is that if you've been following Canadian immigration for the last 12 months, you know that not only the government, but the people of Canada have taken a total 180 in terms of their sentiment towards immigration, right?
Mhm.
Just in the last 11, 12 months alone, we've had study permits capped. We've had the
Yes.
startup visa program completely gutted. We've had the low wage LMIA program completely gutted. We've had the high wage LMIA program made more difficult. And we just saw 2 weeks ago the Canadian Immigration Levels Plan, which for the first time in a long, long, long time, the numbers went down, right? Year over
Mhm.
year. So that's, I think, one of the most interesting parts of this whole conversation. You have Donald Trump wins the election. We all know that we don't know the details yet, but we know he's going to be tough on immigration. And a lot of people think, oh, great for Canada. But here's the thing: Canada's doors aren't wide open like they were the last time Trump was president, right?
Mhm.
In fact, it's quite the opposite. So you're completely right in the sense that Canada will become more appealing relative to the United States with a Donald Trump as president as compared to not. But the
Mhm.
question still remains, number one, does that still put Canada above the US for those prospective immigrants? And if it does, can they even get in? Right?
Mhm.
Because in a perfect world, as you said, you have these, tech founders and smart people and brilliant,
Mhm.
engineers and data scientists. You would think we would make it easy for some of those people to come here, and we used to, but we don't anymore. It's harder than ever. It's harder than ever to get permanent residence in Canada. It's harder than ever to come as a student to Canada. It's harder than ever, really, to do anything in Canada in terms of immigration. So it'll be very, very interesting to see, number one, what does Trump do and in what order? And number two, does it really have a huge effect on Canadian immigration if it's still really difficult to get in, right?
Mhm.
My biggest concerns are, number one, what's going to happen? And there's articles about this already this week. What's going to happen to all the people who are concerned in the US and or who are, have no status or whatever you want to call them in the US, and they're already making their way to the Canadian border, right? Number 1. And number 2 is our system is already kind of busting at the seams, right? Like the humanitarian and compassionate claims are through the roof, refugee and asylum claims are through the roof. Both just had their targets reduced in the levels plan. And based on what Trump's going to do, that's probably going to push a lot of those people up to us. So what's going to happen? I don't know. I don't think it's going to be pretty, if we're being honest here. I
Mhm.
think even before Trump was elected, it's going to be an ugly couple of years for immigrants and aspiring immigrants in Canada. But yeah, maybe I'll take a quick pause there, and you can let me know what you think, or kind of drive us further from there.
I think in essence I agree with you. This is to me also quite like interesting and shocking that for the first time that I think in history that a majority of Canadians have a negative sentiment towards immigration. 60% I think right now of the public is against immigration or thinks that we've taken too many immigrants into Canada. And amongst these people, like, are definitely like first gen immigrants that they are kind of, like looking at the situation like, oh, maybe we do not need to welcome as many immigrants into the country. Like, well, we might have personal views on this, but if we want to be impartial and factual, that's fact of the matter. And as you rightly put, it's very like it's rather challenging right now. If you are a wealthy, educated 40-some-year-old in Vietnam and you want to come to Canada, there's very, very limited options for you, and it's becoming more and more complicated for you and now you have to probably compete with a bunch of like aspiring immigrants that they want to come from across the border and probably will get easier, faster processed if they decide to do so. So But my biggest like thought here is like immigration is such a multifaceted topic. It has to do with economy, it has to do with culture, it has to do it's like it's people's lives that are basically like deciding to change for better. They have a vision. It's such an emotional also topic. But I think Trump election would have some also economic impacts on both the states and also to some extent to Canada, which will also be interesting to follow. What do you think? If you are someone that's planning, to kind of invest time and energy into like looking at Canada, what would you do? What do you advise to them? Do you advise them to what skill sets do you advise them to acquire? How can they best prepare themselves to weather and it's still like get to their goals through this like a little bit of tough times?
Yeah, I would say the answer differs a little bit whether we're talking on somebody inside Canada or outside Canada. I'm kind
Mhm.
of interpreting your question as somebody outside Canada,
Yes.
especially if they're comparing Canada as an option with the U.S.
Mhm.
Number one is go learn French if you don't, right? And that's going to sound like a joke, but the reality is if you already know French or you can learn French, it's your best bet into Canada right now. And we can go into why, or we don't have to go into why. But for whatever reason, the Canadian government, even for people, and especially for people going to provinces other than Quebec, they're really prioritizing French speakers. So, being dead serious, your best chance is to learn French if you don't already know it. Number two is what I would advise somebody who's outside Canada is that if you don't fit under like 4 to 6 different profiles, you're not going to have a good chance at coming into Canada, which is crazy, as you pointed out, because this is the first time, maybe ever, where Canada, the policies, and the people are so anti immigration. When I was practicing, like as I mentioned, I started our tech company Visto, and really started spending most of my time on the tech side around 2020. When I was practicing full time from 2017 to 2020, the conversations were always relatively easy because our doors were open. We were very pro immigration. There were a lot of great programs and options, and you know what I mean? And if you fit into kind of like a couple key categories or boxes, you had a pretty good chance, even if you were outside Canada. Now it's a totally different conversation, right? And I'll just mention here, maybe for those who are watching us after the fact, they're watching the recording. We're recording it on November 7th of 2024. The reason why that's important is number one, just to kind of put this all into perspective. And number two, because if somebody's watching this like 3 weeks from now, God knows what could have already happened, right? Number one, with Trump. And number two, the current Canadian government is making changes like every other week, right?
Yes.
So just so that our future viewers and listeners can keep that in mind. So, what I would say is this to answer your question. If you're a French speaker, great. If you're really serious, relatively young, so like let's say under 35 and relatively serious about upskilling as a student, right? Because the international student program is now has a cap and it has more hoops to jump through, but it's still a decent option. If you want to come to Canada as an international student, you're genuine, you want to come do something in STEM, in healthcare,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. Still a good option, not as easy and great of an option as it was a year ago, but it's an option, right? That's number one. If we're talking about entrepreneurs, in all honesty, Said, it's never been harder. I don't understand it, right? As you said, we don't want to get too political, but I have no clue why the government has been, for example, they made the ICT work permit that much harder for owners and operators and businesses. I have no clue why. Well, I kind of know why, because there's probably been a lot of fraud and people taking advantage of the program. But then why don't you fix the program instead of capping it?
Yes.
right? Because the one thing we probably need in terms of immigration or in terms of the type of immigrant, not to overgeneralize here, but the one that we really need is the entrepreneur. Why? Because our economy is not doing very well, right? What do we need? We need more innovation. We need more job creation. We need more, foreign direct investment and stuff like that. So the fact that not only are they trying to attract entrepreneurs, it's never been harder for entrepreneurs and really anybody to come to Canada. I think that's totally backwards. Now, there still are options. If you are an entrepreneur with offices in more than one country abroad, ICT is still an option for you. You could look into provincial PNPs. Some of the provinces have entrepreneurial programs. Ontario just closed theirs, right? So the most popular destination in Canada, they just closed their entrepreneurial program. But a few other of the provinces do have them as well. Startup visa highly restricted right now and has gotten, because of that, extremely expensive and difficult.
Yes.
So that's tough. So anyways, the overall message for entrepreneurs is there are some options. I would say most promising if you have offices in multiple countries abroad other than Canada, but beyond that it's become harder than ever. And from there, kind of like the last point I'll make is coming as a skilled worker from outside Canada now, if you don't have a company that's willing to sponsor you, you got like you don't really have a chance because, for example, a lot of skilled workers used to come through express entry, even from outside the country, right? Like back in the good old days, like the glory days of Canadian immigration, 2015 is when express entry started. And for those first few years, it was a glorious I still think express entry is actually a pretty good program. The problem is it's just gotten so competitive and so difficult.
Yeah.
You could be and this is why this is a shame. You could be a PhD in AI with 15 years of experience working at the most promising startup in any country around the world. You're not getting into Canada through express entry if you don't have a job offer, a company willing to sponsor you. So if you're a skilled worker trying to come to Canada, you're not an entrepreneur, you don't want to be a student, you got to figure out that job and sponsorship part first. Otherwise, it's going to be near impossible.
Um, oh, I guess, like well, we kind of all knew this anecdotally, like it's becoming, as at Next Stars also, we exist to help entrepreneurs connect them with resources and capital, particularly those who want to relocate to Canada. And we do work with a lot of partners. And what we are also kind of always scratching our head is, we're going to invest into a process to prepare the company for relocation without really having a clear outlook of whether or not the program is going to remain the same at the end of that process. So, like for example, a starter visa, you need to Canadianize an idea, you need to build some traction and then work with a authorized designated entity. And this process takes 6 months. And only to find out that like maybe the program changes tomorrow, like you can't apply anymore, or you can't get an extension of your letter of support, or so on and so forth. And ICT, like you rightly put, like how many like businesses are left now across globally that have multiple offices, and they would like it's a good fit for them to come to Canada. It's really challenging. But if I want to be positive, like probably one silver lining is a lot of my friends that are in the tech sector, they think that there's like this the surrogate of Trump this time is like venture capitalists. Like even the his vice president is a former VC. So probably they think that there's going to be some deregulation maybe, and I'm not saying it's a good thing or bad thing, like just non-judgmentally, and like some of what I'm hearing from my friends in tech, and probably like this would create an edge. And I think for us in Canada, we haven't, like done as well in terms of growing our tech sector, in terms of, creating our next Shopify, our next, Wealth Simple or whatnot. Because a lot of companies don't want to scale here, and there's so many problems. But now is not a very good time, I think, to close the doors on innovators that want to come to Canada from all over the world. Absolutely, you're right. There has been abuses of every program, but I absolutely side with you that we need to fix these programs as opposed to like coming down to them like with the sledgehammers. So what do you think, and I know not neither of us, like I'm not, I don't know about you, but I'm not an economy expert, but what do you think this like having these like surrogates and like the economic vision would impact us across the border, and also people's willingness or our openness in accepting people that want to come to Canada?
Well, I would categorize those into two kind of different questions. Like number one, people accepting immigrants into Canada. That's a huge topic. We could probably talk about that for an hour in and of itself. So maybe I'll start with the economic stuff, and then I'll talk about like general acceptance, which I think is a very important topic. Number one, on the economy side, we're going to have to wait and see what Trump does, because one big thing that could affect us that he's been talking about is tariffs, right? So you mentioned earlier, they're our only border neighbor, and we do a lot of business, and vice versa with the US, right? One thing that Trump has talked about, less related to tech, more related to like, physical goods and manufacturing, et cetera, is tariffs, right? He's talked a lot about it, more so maybe related to China, right? Because of the turbulence, shall we say, between those two countries on like an economic standpoint. But we're going to have to see what he does about the US Canadian border when it comes to trade, right? Is he going to tack on tariffs as strongly as he's kind of hinted at, right? Or is that more so kind of like talking towards other countries, right? Because we've had a good relationship with the US, right? There's a lot of business that gets done. But what happens if Trump starts slapping tariffs on anything and everything coming in from Canada, right? And the other thing too is like the US economy, it's doing pretty well, right? Like you said, I'm not an economic expert, but I read the news every day and I try to follow along, and I have a BCom, so I know the basics. But the US economy and the US tech sector, as you alluded to, it's doing pretty well. Canada, not so much. So, like, we can't really afford for Trump to do too many of these things that's going to hurt our economy. And I hope our government kind of wakes up and realizes this and will work with him. I don't know if Trudeau has a great relationship with Trump. I don't know if Trudeau has a great relationship with anybody, but we said we're not going to get too political. So I'm going to leave it at that. But I think we're going to have to wait and see. I hate that this is my answer, right? Classic lawyer, it depends, blah, blah, blah. We're going to have to wait and see what he does on immigration first. We're going to have to wait and see what he does with the economy and potential tariffs and stuff like that. So that's number one, which is a great question. Number two is like the openness of Canadians to immigrants. It really, no matter where they're coming from, it's surprising, Saeed, but like it's not that surprising that so many people are anti-immigration right now. I think and I hope what people will appreciate is it's not that a whole bunch of Canadians woke up and are now racist, right? And people will kind of overgeneralize and they think immigration means refugee, or they're like, people from outside our country are, you know what I mean? Like, it's not that,
Yeah.
I don't think, and you can let me know if you agree with this. It's the fact that for well, really, I mean, for decades, but for the entire time that the liberals have been in power, look at the immigration numbers. Like in 2015, there were, a couple 100,000 temporary foreign workers and international students coming in through, the work permit and study permit programs. There were a couple 100,000 PRs getting approved a year. Fast forward to 2020, 2021, 2022, they're letting in 600,000 students a year, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of international workers per year. The PR programs have gone up. The PR was a little bit more under control, but continuing to go up. And so what happened, right? Number one, the Canadian infrastructure can't handle it, right? When the number of people coming in per year increase by such a huge amount, and we don't build enough homes and have enough funding for healthcare and, et cetera, everything started to break, right? Number one. And number two is at some point, I don't know when, they stopped processing these programs properly, right? Like there's been articles about how in order to get that many approvals in per year, the Immigration Canada processing agents were basically directed to start cutting corners. So what does that mean? You're not looking at background checks. You're not, you know, checking the validity of documents like acceptance letters and bank statements. So not only was the sheer volume of people way too high, but as more and more people started taking advantage of all that, the quality dropped, right? Not to sound too harsh and like say one person is more valuable than another, but the value dropped. And I think that's one of the big reasons why you have first generation immigrants inside Canada right now looking at who's coming in and how they're coming in and saying, hey, that's not right. Like 5 years ago, I had to go through all these steps and I was vigilantly, assessed and I passed all these check marks and I waited my turn and I got approved. And now it's a different ball game, or, up until a couple of months ago when they took the sledgehammer to all these programs, it was a different ball game. But anyways, I'm going to end this rant because I feel like I've been going on for a little while. But do you agree with that? Like, do you agree that that's kind of like a fair summation of what I would say are probably the two biggest reasons why Canadians are so anti-immigrant right now? Number one, because the infrastructure can no longer handle it, and we're all feeling it. And number two, because the quality dropped with the quantity going up.
I think my view is well, definitely like I feel that the infrastructure has not developed as much as in line with the population growth. However, when you look at the numbers, Josh, the number of net new immigrants into Canada as a percentage of the public has not only not increased but also has been decreasing because the immigration levels have been flat or somewhat ascending since like 2021, 2022. But and we have more and more population. The percentage of growth has been, kind of on the decline. I feel that, and the pain, absolutely, I feel it like any other Canadian. We all feel it, like things are more expensive, like roads are, there's more traffic, and there's less job opportunities. Like obviously, economy is suffering, like anecdotally, not, you don't need to be an expert. But I think, like blaming immigrants for policy failure in the making for over maybe like few decades is probably a scapegoat. So I think it's like
Well,
not really a
I didn't blame
what.
them, right? Like
Yes.
I'm not saying it's their fault. I think if anything, it's the government's fault, 100%, right? So I don't blame most of the immigrants, and I'll say it because most immigrants are genuine, rule following, et cetera, et cetera. But you'd be shocked. I mean, you probably know a lot of this, Saeed, because you're very much in the industry. But you'd be shocked at the degree to which people are abusing the system. Now,
Mhm.
again, is it their fault that the system is that way? Not necessarily. I think the biggest party at fault is the government because they designed it and they let it all happen for 10 years, right? They did virtually nothing for 10 years. If you look back from the end of last year and you go all the way back to 2015, there were no changes to the study permit process. There was virtually no changes to the startup visa. Like they didn't do anything, right? All they did was ramp up the quota every year and reduce the quality of the processing. Nothing else changed, right? And so what happens after you give, when a few years go by and people start to realize, hey, um, I bought a fake IELTS result around the corner and I still got approved. And then they tell their friends, and then their friends tell their friends. And a few years later, everybody's forging their documents, right? Is that the immigrants' fault? I mean, I don't think it's a good thing for a person to do, but I would say it's more so the government's fault for allowing all this to happen. So I just wanted to clarify that I don't think all the blame should be put on the immigrants whatsoever. I think the majority of the fault should be on number one, the government. And I've been very critical of them on LinkedIn. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that unfortunately, a lot of my posts have been very negative over the last year because I don't know, I'm an honest guy, maybe to a fault, but I don't think we've had too much to be excited about on the immigration side. But number one is the government. Number two, a lot of these organizations and associations that are part of these programs. So, for example, if you look at the international student space, the schools, what were the schools doing? Well, they were letting everyone and their mother come study a business admin degree because they could charge them 30 grand and didn't have to find them housing. And then, oh, COVID, perfect virtual classrooms. Now we don't even have to pay for rent and we can fill our classrooms and our pockets and we're not going to vet people. Oh, you have a pulse? Okay, here's a letter of acceptance. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Startup visa. Look at the designated entity list. It's no surprise that, well, I'm not going to go into details and I'm not going to name names, but basically what happened there is people just started, if you knew the right person and you paid enough in fees, you'd get the letter of support, right? So what happens? The volume of applications go through the roof. The small team that's there to process the startup visas can't handle it, right? It's just too much volume and it's filled with non-genuine, what percentage, you do a lot of work in the startup visa space, what percentage of startup visa applicants do you actually think were like genuine tech founders with traction? Now, you were probably working with a high percent, right? You're a legitimate guy, you have a legitimate business, but I'm sure you've heard the stories of, oh, hey, rich guy in the Middle East wants to immigrate to Canada. Okay, we're going to use his wife. She's now going to be the CEO of Random Technology.ai, and we're going to build a product, and we're going to blah, 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 and throw together a pitch deck and apply for the startup visa, right? So all these organizations that are, not all of them, but a significant amount of these organizations related to all these immigration programs, they also did nothing, right? They helped the floodgates remain open. So anyways, now I'm
But
ranting
look,
again,
like,
but
but I
yeah.
know, Josh, and you have a lot of really, really valid points. Look, you're right in the middle of the industry. Not only yourself are working with clients that are coming to you with their life story and they're looking to you to help them find the pathway to Canada, but also because of your startup, you're day in, day out working with other immigration professionals that are kind of living and breathing this situation. I think like well, definitely, like I'm a believer in policy. Like when people react to incentives, right? Like you can shape behavior with the right incentives, with the right policy. I believe part of the challenge is that we do not have a proper business immigration strategy. Like, look, for if someone comes to you, like with a profile, like there's only so many programs you can forge them into, right? So like that creates a situation or a scenario that probably is less than ideal. If it was up to me, I would give a Rolodex of solutions, like that, so you can perfectly fit, a candidate, because if people want to come to Canada, right, then they will find a way. But it's best to kind of align their values, their assets with the needs of the country and the needs of different provinces, the types of businesses that we need in different provinces. And this is also like purely on the economic class, but also like for students, you can talk about it, the skilled workers, even refugees. You can take those considerations, in this into decision making. One thing that I foresee that to happen this time, and if I think from a Canadian perspective, like you'd be a bit worried about is our problem of brain drain to the States. We particularly in the startups, because like I'm passionate about helping founders, whether newcomers to Canada or people that like they have a company in Canada, they want to bring a company to Canada to grow on a scale. And what ends up happening in a lot of cases, Josh, as I'm sure you know it, and we wrote a report. If anyone wants to read it, you can go to my LinkedIn page. Most of the companies, they start here or they come here, like they're effectively a new startup here, even if they had some traction. They need capital, they need revenue. So because we have a large country with a small market, they have to look south of the border to grow, to scale, and a lot often to access capital. And what ends up happening, unfortunately, a lot of times is they go where the capital is, like they end up creating an office in Delaware, Boston, Buffalo, and next thing you know, they completely relocate their entire operation. And I've seen this many times in our fellow startup like founders that we work together. And probably like at this point we're gonna probably see a lot more of that happening, particularly if Trump decides to make incentives for venture capital for investments into the tech sector. And what is your advice to the policymakers to not fall behind in the race for talent? As people have options now. There's Europe has amazing options. Like Singapore has options. Japan has options. Australia, so what would you say to the policymakers? What would be your advice, like just as an immigration lawyer, but also someone that like understands technology and is building a startup himself?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Saeed, and I also see exactly what you said every day. Maybe not every day, because I'm doing more immigration stuff than startup stuff, but well, in the immigration industry than the startup industry. But so many founders have exactly what you said. So a couple thoughts. Number one is, I mean, Trump is a good thing, right? In that regard, because if he makes immigration harder, then part of what I saw in his first what's it called, 4-year stint, shall we say? The word is escaping me, but in his first stint, is more companies that had offices in the U.S. were actually opening up offices in Canada, because they didn't, number one, it was harder for them to keep that foreign talent in the U.S. And number two, they didn't know what the heck he was going to do next. At least Canada has been, up until a year ago, very reliably pro-immigration. So as a business owner, you were relatively safe to say, okay, let's open up an office in Canada. It's a great, I know if I get my employees there, they're going to be fine. They're going to settle. They're going to get PR. They're going to get, et cetera, et cetera. Again, going back to earlier, now it's not, I would say it's still a good option, right? Like, especially if you're a successful or growing tech company, there are options to establish a business and move some of your key, especially tech employees, into Canada and keep them here for a long amount of time. But to answer your question, number one, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is you need a program for entrepreneurs. You need a federal program for entrepreneurs, because SUV is too difficult right now. Like, imagine right now, there might be a foreign-born founder. Let's just use an example, all right? Brilliant guy from India is in California right now. He was born in India. He's now in California. 2 years ago, started a tech company. It's taken off, making millions, raised tens of millions. They have a staff of 50 or, whatever, 25, 50. The number doesn't matter. they're crapping their pants because of Trump and they're not sure what to do. We should be the obvious answer to that problem. And we still kind of are, but we certainly are not as good of an option as we were a year ago, before all these changes happen. So number one, get the entrepreneurial options in order. Make a good federal immigration program, focus on certain industries, make it transparent, and then actually implement it well. The one thing I will really give credit to IRCC, Immigration Canada, up until about a year or two ago, is they have designed great programs. All these programs that I'm kind of crapping on right now, startup visa, international students, express entry, I actually think they are great programs. Like back in 2017, 2018, when things were going well and numbers weren't too high, the Canadian immigration system was world renowned. Express entry was a world renowned points based immigration program. SUV, one of the best in the world, right?
People
Et cetera, et
copied
cetera.
SUV. You know, like
Yeah, express entry too. Think of
many
all the
European
provinces
countries.
that have
Yeah.
adopted points based systems, right? Since then,
Yes.
right? So IRCC, up until about a year or two ago, has been great at designing and launching programs. They have to get the other half right, which is the actual implementation and proper processing of
Yes.
of those applications. And I hope that they can make improvements there. So number one, we got to make a good and clear and usable and transparent program for entrepreneurs. Number two is like there needs to be the right carve outs. So one problem, a big problem we're seeing right now is getting permanent residence, right? Because if you want to attract the people that you're talking about and the businesses, it's one thing to get them a work permit so they can come work in Canada, but it's another thing for those workers and the owners of the business to be confident enough that those workers can settle. And settle means getting permanent residence in Canada, right? That's the term, permanent residence. Maybe in the US, like green card or whatever, right? The next step up from like temporary residence, right? Because if you're an owner, number one, you want to make sure that people can stay for a while if you're going to open up an office there. And number two, if you're going to attract the best talent, you have to give these people certainty, right? If I am
Yes.
a brilliant developer, AI, data scientist, engineer, blah, 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 I'm brilliant. I've got 10, 15 years of experience. I can write my own check at any FANG company or any startup or wherever. Do I want to go to a country that's super anti-immigration where I might have to wait 15 years for a green card? Or do I want to go get a work permit through the global talent stream in Canada? It's going to last 3 years and then have a pretty good chance of getting PR within a couple of years from there. And then within 3 years of that, I might even be able to apply for citizenship, right? So this was, again, up until like a year ago, the comparison between the US and Canada, even before Trump, was incredible for tech workers, right? Because you could say, hey guys, move your company here, expedited work permit through GTS, relatively easy shot at PR through Express Entry because you get the bonus points from the LMIA. And then another thing, the beauty of Canada is like you get here on PR, you spend your first 3 years on the ground there, you might be able to apply for citizenship. So
Yes.
especially people from countries with long wait times for green cards in the US, Canada looked like a dream. And so we need to kind of get back to that, right? Like, for example, one of the biggest problems with Express Entry right now, again, was world renowned. They've made some improvements, but I hope that they make a few more improvements, is things like they don't differentiate between someone with 5 years of work experience and 20 years of work experience, right? For some reason, up until 5 years, after that, it doesn't matter, right? I kind of understand like where they're coming from, but they need to tweak and improve it, right? So if you're an AI expert, right? One of the most valued types of tech workers on the planet today, you have 20 years of experience, you're leading teams, you're, whatever they do, right? I don't know what those people do, but they're much smarter than I am. You will have the same amount of points as someone who just, did their, maybe let's say you have a PhD. If they have a PhD and 3 years of foreign work experience or 5 years of work experience in Canada, you get the same amount of points. So that doesn't add up. They need to make a few tweaks and improvements to really recognize the best and the brightest so that we can attract them here.
I absolutely, it resonates with me, Josh. And one thing we have to consider, comparing 2016 to today, besides a little bit of anti-immigrant sentiment amongst the public and the government, is just the sheer fact that we are living in a very different world. Like the amount of technology improvements and has been, immense over the past like 8 years. Now, the definition of a startup is same but different, like still you have to have a clear understanding of a problem, but something that was deemed innovative in 2016 is a matter of 2 weeks work and a bunch of APIs, and you go to market. So I think you're right. We need to bring in people. I remember like when Trump came in 2016, a bunch of these big tech companies like Amazon, Microsoft, they were looking into creating offices into Canada because they wanted to bring in their own talents and they wanted to use the Canadian dream as a carrot, really, to attract them and bring them over and kind of give that stability was something that was very appealing to the people around the world. Partially, like the economy is like in a lot of places in the world, is not doing great. And when the pie is not growing as fast, and there's more people around the table like wanting to access the same amount of pie, it creates competition. It might create resentment, but things are transitory, like the immigration goes open, goes closed, goes open, doors close, doors open, doors close. What we have to like really be cautious about is the brand, globally, that like we still like when people think of Canada, like stability, reliability, openness, like our values are kind of important. So I think if we look at like have a positive outtake, then we can agree that, probably like the Canadian option, if we kind of act quickly, if we create good programs, if we create that platform, is going to be an opportunity for us to attract people, not only from the States, but also globally, give them a better option, kind of clearly define ourselves and the Canadian way of entrepreneurship, the Canadian way of growth. And we have to also understand what sectors or what type of talent, do we need to lead the way for our next wave of business with all these developments. Look, we were the inventors of AI practically, but now we kind of lost I would say the torch, and now we have to like really make investments and bring the best of the best, to Canada to be able to stay competitive. So I think with that, because I know we're running out of time, I want to just take a look at the comment section. Farouk is mentioning that agreed. Also, as Josh mentioned, Trump will be harsh on refugees, but will also pave the way for scaling and growing American businesses. And I really don't think he is against legal immigration, for example, business immigration. So once the American companies grow significantly, as they will be getting corporate tax cut, etc., they will need talent, and Trump won't hesitate to open up the borders for legal immigration. We also know that Elon Musk is pro-legal immigration. So Canada somehow needs to stay competitive. We must. Very interesting outtake. What do you think, Josh?
I think it's a great take, Farouk, and I think it's in line with what you just said, Saeed, which is my biggest concern with the negative sentiment right now, which is spinning 180 degrees and making all these harsh changes and being so negative going to hurt brand Canada, right? That's kind of how I'll call like, you know, the the appeal of Canada worldwide, right? Let's call it brand Canada. My biggest concern is exactly what the two of you are saying, which is number one, Trump, again, we're not going to get too political here. Love him or hate him, the guy's a businessman, and he's going to, I think, make some moves exactly like Farouk is saying to help with the economy and to grow businesses and to get skilled talent, right? That legal immigration. So it might not be too scary for skilled talent in the US as we think it is, right? Because again, the problem is a lot of people, they just think immigration as one big thing. So they think Trump means anti-immigration, means no more immigration. That's not the case, right? It will be for some types of immigration, but not all types of immigration. So if he starts making smart moves related to skilled immigration, we're going to be even further behind. And as you said, everything swings back, things are transitory. The world is getting more and more competitive. There's only so much amazing, great tech talent out there. There's only so many amazing doctors out there. There's only so many amazing agricultural, whatever people and truckers and, stuff out there. If we keep these anti-immigration and negative sentiments going, people are going to turn their heads away. And when things go back to the way they were, which is, hey, everybody really needs skilled talent, people aren't going to be looking our way. That's my biggest concern. So hopefully our government can take heed of Farouk's warning and our warning. My concern has been that really the Liberal government, again, not to get too political, but politics is very much linked to what we're talking about. I think they've just been swinging with the wind, which means for the last 10 years, as everyone's been pro-immigration, they've been crazy pro-immigration. The wind switches directions last year, and now they're just wiping out everything. And I don't think they're doing it strategically enough to heed Farouk's warning and to heed, the thing that you and I see are concerned about, which is, hurting brand Canada. So hopefully I'm wrong. We'll also have an election of our own next year. It'll be interesting to see how that goes and how that affects things. But yeah, that's my biggest concern.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Josh, and thanks for everyone who joined. The point of these conversations is like we care about innovation, we care about keeping the doors open, having a welcome mat for newcomers and newcomer innovators, like people that want to come and make a positive impact, positive change. And the hope is to bringing people together, force conversations, surface ideas, because at the end of the day, like Josh, people like you are on the front lines talking to the clients, talking to the people, like learning about their challenges and their aspirations. And the hope is to be able to like create some solutions, bring like innovative and different perspective to the picture. So I appreciate everyone who joined us and listened on this very insightful conversation. I learned a lot myself. Thank you so much, Josh. You have a very interesting perspective because not only you're an immigration expert, but also you understand technology. You have a startup. You're building a solution to solve a problem that you've seen in your own industry. And I thought, bringing your perspective would be like and hearing your points of view would be greatly beneficial, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Josh.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I hate that so much of it had to be so negative, but as you said, we do this to hopefully share ideas, share thoughts, hopefully for the better, right? So that we can start heading in the right direction. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and until next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.